Welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast, where we tackle issues at the intersection of leadership, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Rob Shields, Vice President of Strategy at 1110 Leadership, and I'm joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of 1110 Leadership, David Spickard. Proverbs 1110 lays out a bold and countercultural vision. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. We're here to ask, what does it look like practically to be this type of leader? Leaders willing to invest everything they have so that everyone around them can thrive. Join us on the journey as we lean in, listen, and learn how to become Proverbs 11:10 kind of leaders. The kind of leaders that make our cities rejoice.
Welcome, everyone. We are continuing our conversation of what it means to be just, and today is the same, where I get to introduce one of my most favorite people, Shay, who has helped me understand what it means to care for people in need, particularly material need. And many of you who know me know how I've talked about Shay Bethea when she was hired at Jobs for Life. She served first as my assistant, and I hired her part-time because she was so committed to what we were trying to do to make Jobs for Life a household name, which she talked about in her interview. It became apparent that I needed to not just lead Shay, but follow her and to learn from her and equip her to lead and train people involved with our work. She became the director of training at Jobs for Life. And over the last 2 years, the director of the U.S. Jobs Ministry at the Chalmers Center for Economic and Development in Chattanooga, which, as many of you know, Chalmers is just a leading voice in what it looks like for churches to walk with people in need. Without further ado, Shay, hey, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Great, David. Thank you for inviting me. I always love having conversations with you.
Yeah, well, it's a bright light in my day. I hope it's a bright light for everybody who's listening today. So we have just a few, I have some questions that I wanted to ask Shay, but we might go off script. We'll see how our conversation goes. Shay, as we think about people in material poverty, and I know you think about this, again, through your work, but also just through your own experience. Mm-hmm. What words or ideas come to mind when you think of poverty?
The first thing when I think of poverty, broken relationships, material poverty, trauma, shame, marred identity, invisible, stereotypes. Those are some words that come to mind for material poverty.
Where do those ideas come from? What's fueling your thoughts around those words?
My experience.
Yep.
Yeah.
More about that.
When you're living in poverty, people see you, but they don't see you. We've been cloned as the invisible people. People trapped in generational poverty. My family it wasn't that I didn't have an example of work. I saw my dad get up every morning and go to work. When I tell people I'm the youngest of 10 children, I get asked often, and this is the truth, do all of you have the same dad? Yeah, we all have the same dad, but we know people trapped in generational poverty, particularly people of color, the narrative has been for so long, and what we've seen in society is that term baby mama drama.
One of 10 children.
Same mom, same dad.
Wow. What was growing up like?
Well,
and you were the youngest.
And I'm the youngest, yes. So growing up for me is, of course, the narrative is going to be different than my older siblings because I never got anything new. I always had the hand-me-down. We lived in public housing for my first 6 years on this earth. And it's interesting, David, because a lot of times people like my family would not come out of that community called public housing unless someone died, there was a life insurance policy, that type of thing. And so that's what happened to my family. That's how we were able to move out of public housing is a sibling passed away. which is unfortunate. Living in public housing, going to school, the shame. You have children not in public housing, and those of us walking to school, the clothing that we have. So we don't have the name brand clothing like other kids do. And so we're ridiculed. Just the shame trapped in generational poverty. Grateful to God. I can share with people who don't have that experience and help them understand, unless you take the time to be intentional to get to know me, you really don't know me. And some of the things you think you know, it's not the truth.
Are there any other questions like that one you just mentioned where people thought you were from, all of you were not from one father? Or were there other questions that you got about that questioned your upbringing based on people's perceptions of your experience? For example, just one might be, did anyone question whether your parents should have that many children?
Yes.
And of course, thankfully they did, because you're number 10.
Yes, I'm number 10. Yes, and I'm grateful. That attacks who you are. Like, why did your mom and dad have that many kids? How did y'all feed everybody? How did everybody get clothed? When you have those questions posed, trying to figure it out, you don't know what to say. As I matured, I knew what to say. It attacks who I am as an individual, because it's like, well, something is wrong with me because my parents decided to have 10 kids.
How did you feel about yourself growing up? Or described how you thought about you and your value and things that you felt like you had opportunities, and then maybe some things that you really had to overcome because of your lived experience.
Living in public housing was one thing, but then when we moved into our own house, it was almost like a liberation. Now it's like, well, where do you live? And so it's a difference in how you respond and your posture, because now you no longer have to say that you live in public housing. You can say your street name and address. That was an incredible sense of pride to say, we live on blah, 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 blah street. Those days shaped me, because even within our culture, I saw a difference in how people of color treated me. Now we're no longer in public housing. So the people that were still in public housing had ought against us, because now we moved out of public housing. Families on the street we moved into were very welcoming. I saw different family dynamics with individuals who were middle to upper class, people who looked like me. They drove the fanciest cars. They had the really nice homes on the inside. And so those are things that I remember in terms of how I felt about who I am. Being the youngest of 10, I tell people all the time, I did not really understand. But when my mom had me, she was tired of kids. So we didn't have the mother-daughter relationship that most daughters have. My mom was in her late 30s, almost 40. I was her 10th child. She was sick of kids. So I just didn't have that. Not until I turned 40 years old did I come to the place of, I have been dealing with the spirit of abandonment all these years. Right? Wow. I was dealing with the spirit of abandonment because my mom, we didn't have that relationship. I created this imaginary relationship with my mom that I had, and really didn't come to grips with that until I turned 40 years old. And I was sitting at this table talking to women, sharing with them my lived experience. And I just came to the realization, all these years I've been dealing with the spirit of abandonment.
Did you have dreams when you were younger about who you wanted to be?
Sure.
And how to get there? Did you have a difficult time picturing what you could do given the obstacles you faced, or that spirit of being abandoned?
For me, living in poverty was just not the life that I wanted to live. I did not want to be 40 years old saying, oh my goodness, I'm still in the same place. So I'm kind of like judging my sisters, like, why aren't you like Tina's sister? You're not that to me. And so I knew right then, as I'm going through my lived experience, this is not what I want. I want something different. I'm not going to be you.
When you left home, what happened? Describe your journey.
Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, I had some women who were pouring into me. Leaving home, I knew college was going to be my out. So being able to get some scholarships, go to school for a year, and only to have that dream crushed by my dad because he only had a third grade education. So education wasn't something that he valued. And in his lived experience, the IRS was the enemy. People think the IRS is the enemy today.
We just passed tax day. Yeah.
So because of that, he would not relinquish his tax information. I had to drop out of school.
Wow.
And got married. I said, okay, so I'm not going to school. My next out in my head is I'm going to get married. And I'm just going to have this storybook romance, and we're just going to have this great life together, and we're going to build an empire. No, that did not happen. It was almost like that spirit of abandonment caused me to make decisions I probably would not have made had my relationship with my mom or my sisters been different. I really believe that.
And then you had time on your own with your children. What was that season like? And what did you have to overcome?
Yeah, I knew when I became a single mom after being divorced from my husband, their dad, one of the promises that I did make, not just to my parents, but to myself, was that I was not going to be one of the Black women who had children with multiple fathers. That was just something I did not want for me. I promised my parents that. Then finding myself divorced, being a single mom of two beautiful kids, life was interesting because the harder I felt like I was working, I could not seem to get ahead. I mean, and I worked every single day, but I just could not get ahead.
How old were your kids at that time?
Just continuing to work, being that single mom who wanted stability for her kids. I heard about Habitat for Humanity, got connected to Habitat for Humanity, had a home built through Habitat for Humanity, which was so incredible and amazing to know that as a young single mom, I could own a home. I helped build a home my children took pride in, having their own room, having my own key, and saying, this is something we did. This is something I did for my kids. After staying in that community for several years, had a jealous neighbor start making false reports to Child Protective Services against me, which led to eventually my children being taken by the state of North Carolina, not because they could prove what was being said. It was because they didn't know what to do with a single mom who wasn't abusing alcohol, who wasn't a prostitute, who wasn't abusing drugs. She was a young Black woman who had an administrative job, who took care of her kids. And so at the end of the day, I was the one that they were going to make an example out of. And it wasn't because of anything I did wrong. It was because I was doing everything right. I was going above and beyond what was asked of me. That did not sit well with the powers that be. So there we go. That's the short version.
That is the short version. What and their ages when they were taken from you?
8 and 5. 8, 5.
8 and 5.
Mm-hmm. 8 and 5.
Yeah. How do you feel?
Brian Stevenson says, our country treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent. I experienced that firsthand. I experienced individuals who didn't look like me become angry because I complied to every request, everything that was asked of me to do. And that was used against me. And so as a result of that, it was, we're going to make an example out of you, and we're going to give you an ultimatum. And the ultimatum was either you go to prison or you can sign your rights away. And you'll no longer be a parent to your children. So that's what I did.
It's just hard to believe that that is the world we live in, and that actually happened. That people listening to this would believe you did everything above board, followed all the rules, and yet you experienced no parent ever wants to have their kids taken away from them. Complete injustice. For real?
When I had this young lady, the supervisor of the Guardian ad litem office, she said I would have to prove I know how to be a mom. When I asked her if she had children, she told me that that was irrelevant. I beg to differ. It is very relevant, because I can't prove to you something that you've never experienced, because you'll never know what it's like for a single mom to figure out a strategy when her children are sick and she still needs to go to work. You will never understand how a single mom has to strategize if her children get sick and you have to work. How do you get your sick children from school? Who is going to pick up your children? How are you going to make ends meet on one income? So you really don't know. And so the challenge of that irked. These were her very words, David, verbatim. Your case is not black or white. If your case was black or white, I could tell you to get clean, go to rehab, but your case is gray. So you're going to have to prove to me that you know how to be a mom. And when I was given everything that I was supposed to do, if they say you need to go to counseling once a week, I went twice a week. If they said that you need to make sure that you're on time for your visits to see your children, I was 30 minutes early. So what happened during those times of visitation, sometimes they would tell me there was a mix-up in communication. So I couldn't see my children. They asked, is she literate? My psychologist at the time said, everybody in unison said, oh yes, she's literate. Typically, when they have a black woman, a single mom in this situation, either she's on drugs, she's a prostitute, she's an alcoholic, but never have they ever had a young black woman, single mom who worked every day, was owning a home through Habitat for Humanity, had stability for her children. That just was not, it just wasn't the norm. So here I am.
It's crazy.
Caught in this place of not being able to afford the right type of counsel, but because I couldn't afford to pay, I had to deal with a public defender. At one point, I thought all white people were evil. That was just my truth.
Dealing with at that time were white.
That's right.
Though you did everything right, they continually told you you were unfit.
Exactly. And so when you hired me at Jobs for Life, and just knowing that I had to walk in a place of forgiveness, because that unforgiveness was like a cancer. It was killing me. And when I would meet the David Spickards of the world, I would be charging you with something that you didn't even do to me. It was other people that did it.
And I just thought I was offering you a job.
Right. You just thought right. You were offering me a job.
I want to come back to that in just a second. Tell me, so what happened when your children were older and how you reconnected with them.
Yeah, a lot of people will probably think this is crazy, but I'm going to tell you something about the power of prayer and being connected to God and being in a place where you can really hear from the Holy Spirit. During the time MySpace had just launched, I was praying one day and I heard
Pre-Facebook,
pre-Facebook,
normal social media,
all
MySpace.
probably don't.
It maybe lasted maybe 8 months.
That's about it, right? But long enough for the Holy Spirit to speak to me, that children on MySpace, 3 words, children on MySpace. And I logged in onto my computer, logged into MySpace. I put my son's name in. Nothing popped up. I put my daughter's name in. Whoop, picture popped up. And that's how I reconnected. I reached out to her. She told me that my son's contact info was at the bottom of her page. I called him, of course, at that time he was 18. And when I called him, I told him, I said, my God, son, you have no idea how long I've been looking for you. Because they separated the two of them. They would not allow my children, anyone in my family, to take my children, which is unheard of. That's why I know that they were trying to make an example out of me. Like, you're not getting those children back. You are not getting those children back. She said that in court. And so she was going to make good on that promise. But because I serve a God who loves me in spite of, God reconnected me with my son that night. And I picked him up the day that we reconnected, I went to Charlotte, North Carolina and picked my son up and brought him home.
Well, because he was free to do that.
That's right, at 18.
Since he was 18.
That's right.
And then Shanae did that at 18 as well.
She sure did. At one point, David, I didn't know where they were. I just knew that they had been adopted. I didn't know who adopted them after they made my family jump through all of those hoops and still said, no, we're not allowing her family to get her kids.
What was it like when they first came back?
What was it like when I actually heard their voices on the phone? Yeah. It was, Jamal was 18, voice deep, he's his deep baritone voice now. And just being able to, what was really interesting was that I tried to sell the home that they were taken from, because it was I just needed to get out of there. But God would not allow me to sell that home until they came back home. When both of them came back home, that's when I was able to sell my home. Wow. So being able to bring them back home to the place where they were taken was a full circle moment. And it was just incredible. It was bittersweet, but it was God. It was a God kind of moment. Yeah.
So over time, as you and I have been in relationship, your story has, come out in pieces. I knew a little bit of it when we first connected and I hired you, and, it made me realize how much I needed to hear and listen to stories. Talk about, one is, you mentioned trauma at the beginning in terms of how that connects to poverty, and anyone who's listened to your story would understand the elements of trauma, just bits of it through that. But also this idea of what employers or what business leaders or leaders of any other organization need to have in mind as they reach out to people who've had similar types of stories or sort of overcoming poverty in their life, and how they need to lead to create an environment for people to thrive when they come to work. So there's two parts of that question, just the dynamic of trauma, and then what advice you would give to employers, particularly as I think about hiring folks who have some real challenges to overcome because they're coming from a lifestyle where they've intersected with material poverty in profound ways, and how might they lead in such a way for them to be successful at work?
Yeah, great questions too. First thing I would say, David, is that poverty is a breeding ground for trauma. All sorts of trauma happens when you're living in poverty. And poverty also, or trauma, has triggers. And when you are an employer who is thinking about hiring someone who has been traumatized or who has lived experiences of trauma, one of the things that I would say to that employer is, first, be willing to know that when the triggers happen, it's really, how can I say this? When the triggers happen, just know that if you show love and patience, eventually a person will come to the place where they will be okay. Pack that a little bit more, Shay. If I have trauma that is unaddressed, when I go to work, 9 times out of 10, a trigger is going to happen. When that trigger happens, and we don't know what the trigger might be for that particular individual, but when it does happen, having an employer being willing to lean in and ask some questions, as opposed to saying, oh no, I made a mistake, this is not going to work, I should have known better than this. Lean in, ask the questions, and then if they don't know the questions to ask, seek professional people who know the right questions to ask so that they can get to the root of it. People don't have particular behaviors because they just want to have that particular behavior. There's a root to that behavior. There's a reason why they are acting that way, or they're responding that way, or they're not communicating at all. And being able to lean in and have enough patience to say, okay, there's something going on here. Let's get to the root of it.
So those behaviors too might appear on the outside to be people who are not following through on their tasks, or just basic work-related issues that are masked by deeper trauma, that if there's some level of empathy and patience, like you said, we can uncover what that is. Why would an employer, or again, a leader, want to do that? In other words, wouldn't it be easier just to hire someone who doesn't have that in their background, who's, quote, well put together, and I don't have to deal with these people issues and I can move on? Why would I see the opportunity to hire someone who has barriers like that be good for me and help me even compete as a business in the marketplace?
You know, as I think about you and I think about other leaders who are entering into this space of hiring individuals who are on the margins, I feel like leaders, David, need to be called to it. I feel like there's something that God is speaking to their hearts, something internally within them that God is calling them to be a just leader. I don't think an employer is going to just wakes up one day and say, you know what? I think there's something deeper in them that God is calling them to, that puts them in a place of being intentional about hiring the Shays of the world. And unlike other employers who don't do that, they're missing out on seeing God in that person's life. I believe you saw God at work in my life in ways that another employer wouldn't have been able to see that. And because you were privileged to see that, I think God did a work in you. God was doing something in me, but he was also doing something in you that caused both of our worlds to shift and make us both better.
No question. The way I describe it is a couple things. One is I experienced God's fullness through our relationship and through the journey that you and I have been on. And for me to see you and know your story and to just, how can you possibly forgive, Shay? Like, how can you possibly experience that unjust situation, having your children ripped from you? And those of us who are parents, picture that. Picture your precious children and you not being able to parent them and have them grow up with you through the formative years of their life. Shay did not have that with her children. So how does Shay forgive her oppressor or people who are associated as her oppressor, which someone like me represents that, and how God might redeem that? So going back, I just offered you a job. And that's my mentality. And I'm thinking about how we can be strategic with the fact that reaching people in need. And I'm very distant from that with my background. So I need to be able to have people on our team who are close. And so for me, it was strategic. And it turned out to be much more strategic than I thought, because of how I could see really the gospel made known in such a way that when it talks about forgiving and loving your enemies, I'm being taught that through Shay, who is mentoring me and leading me around that. Shay was the best person in the role. You were by far and away, still are, extraordinary in the way you equip people. So it wasn't charity. And that's the other piece of this that we have to be careful of, that we don't approach this as like we're doing someone a favor.
Right.
Because there are people who are gifted in certain ways that they're the best person for the job. And we not only can compete, but we can win.
Right.
And the other piece is, you have a whole different view of success too. What is success? And having a broader view of that than just thinking that it's one thing or the other, which gives us more impetus to think about how we use our places of business or our organizations to engage people in ways so that everyone wins.
That's right.
Which is the big idea. If someone says we need to wrap up, I hate this because we all get into this and then it gets so good and then we have to wrap up. But the hope is that people who are listening want more, and we can figure out ways to do that. So if somebody says, I don't have time, this is too much, I don't know how to engage, what advice, what perspective would you give them in terms of, and we've talked about it from the place of kind of an employer reaching out to people who have barriers and hiring them, but it's also in our own lives, how do we get close to proximate people in need in natural ways so that we can have that experience of the fullness of God?
Yeah. When people say, I remember having a conversation with a sister. She said to me, it's just hard. I turned around. We were at an event and I asked her, what's hard about it? What's hard about engaging someone that you don't know? You've met people before that you didn't know, and you had conversation with them. What is so hard about you having a person who looks like me in your life? And the room went silent. And she said, honestly, I don't know. I said, well, guess what? We're going to change that. And you and I, we're going to start communicating with each other, and we're going to build a sister relationship. Are you open for that? And she said, yes. And she's an attorney. Go figure. She's an attorney. who lives here in Raleigh, and she and I have become the best of friends. I'm Black, she's white. And so when we say it's too hard, how can we say it's too hard if God is in us? I love to challenge people with that. What is hard about building a relationship with someone who doesn't look like you, who doesn't live in your neighborhood, who doesn't attend your church, who doesn't have your pedigree? What is hard about that? Who told you it was hard? Why do you believe it's hard? It's not hard. It's just like you're meeting someone else that someone in your affinity group introduced you to. If you don't have access to people that have a different lived experience than you, then I would encourage you to be intentional about connecting to people who are, so that you can experience God in a totally different way. Because when we don't, David, honestly, we're missing out on another side of God, that we're really missing out on God.
Amen.
And people who are not like us.
Absolutely.
I thank God for you being in my life too. Thank you.
Yeah. So we'll have to keep talking, and maybe there'll be another time where we kind of hit the tip of the iceberg, but there's a lot more there. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
To learn more about 1110 Leadership, visit our website at 1110leadership.com. That's the numerals 11, then spelled out TEN, leadership.com. There you'll find more resources to equip you on the journey of becoming an 1110 leader. You can also get connected to our growing leadership network. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. To help others find us, you can also rate us on Apple Podcasts or you listen to